Thanks, Desiree. So welcome back to Nasrec here in Johannesburg. You've got a helicopter circling over us at the moment. Of course, my guest, and you're going to meet him in a moment, saying perhaps that's a sign that that is security signaling that the president is close and that plenary will kick off. Of course, yesterday, as things closed off for the party delegates, no real clear definition of when things would kick off. A sort of suggestion that plenary would start at 9 o'clock this morning. It is past 10, it hasn't happened, but we've seen delays all throughout this conference. So all we can do is wait to hear when the party will get going, and then we'll know just how close we are to the announcement of the top 7 of the African National Congress. But let's get some analysis before we got to the 55th National Conference. Some really big movements for the African National Congress and its leadership weeks prior to this conference. One of them even being the report of the independent panel that then provided the Section 89 report looking into the Phala Phala saga. And you may remember that as soon as that independent panel was set up, one of the key names on there was law professor, Professor Richard Calland. He joins us now from Nasrec. Prof, good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you, Naledi. Thanks for the opportunity to chat with you.
I think it's an interesting time to speak to you because when we knew that an independent panel was going to set up, you were one of the first names announced. Would you take us back to that responsibility when you got it from the beginning and your initial thoughts?
Certainly, I don't really want to talk about myself, but what I can happily talk about is the importance of the panel and its work. Clearly, this was the first time that this particular new process had been triggered, and the idea of the panel, as I understood it, was that it would act as a kind of filter. An impeachment is a very serious matter, and you can't have a situation in any democracy where an impeachment process is triggered lightly or triggered for vexatious or frivolous purpose. That would cause huge destabilization of the democratically elected government. And so, as indeed former Chief Justice Sandile Ngcobo pointed out on the day of the release of the panel, his report, it is a very serious matter. So I was interested by how the panel would go about this work, how they would look at the evidence, and of course the outcome.
Yeah, I'm looking at the outcome then and some of the assertions that were made before you were removed from the panel. There was the assertions that you are an ally of the president. Do you think, had you been part of that panel, that the report would have looked any different?
I wouldn't be human if I didn't have those kinds of thoughts in one's mind, but it's really not terribly important to think what might have been. It's a counterfactual. The truth is we have to deal with the report as it was tabled. My view, and I've stated this many times in the past 2 or 3 weeks, is that it's a report that unfortunately fails to live up to the high expectations that the law requires of it and that the democratic system and the Constitution requires of it. As I said a few moments ago, it was a weighty responsibility placed on that panel's shoulders. I fear that it did not discharge it in the way that they should. The report needed to produce an impeccable report. The panel needed to produce an impeccable report, one that everybody could trust if the impeachment process was to be credible and legitimate. And that's not the case, and that's why the President has taken the report on review. My view as a lawyer and as a professor of law is that the report, and that was my view right from the beginning, the first night I read it, was that it was flawed, that it made mistakes in law, and that with all due respect to the chair of the panel, Sandile Ngcobo, for whom I've got the highest regard, I thought he was a superb Chief Justice, I do think it's flawed, and it's right that it's reviewed. Now, of course, it's been squashed politically because Parliament has taken the view, mainly because they don't trust the report, that it would be unwise to proceed with phase 2 of the impeachment. So that impeachment process is now, of course, stopped.
You think that process of the independent panel, regardless of which way the report ended up swaying, right, that it definitely has a big impact on how the president does at the selective conference?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question, of course, and it's an inevitable question to consider. If he loses this morning, if he fails to regain the presidency of the ANC, inevitably people are going to say, well, that's because his credibility was dented by the Phala Phala scandal. if on the other hand he wins and regains the presidency, then it may be that people will say, well, the party shared the view of the ANC caucus in Parliament last week when it decided that this matter should not proceed because the panel had not discharged its constitutional duty in terms of Section 89 of the Constitution. So that's where we're at. It will be very hard, of course, as a lawyer, you look for causation. You look for the links in the evidential chain. It will be very hard, whichever way the result goes this morning, to link it to any specific one thing or another. My view, I think, is that the President came into this conference a little bit stronger, ironically, as a result of what happened in the previous 2 weeks, because I put it in an article in the Financial Mail. He found his vertebrae, he found his spine, and his response to the report, having considered resigning, and as you know, lady, coming very close to resigning on that fateful Thursday, he then was encouraged to think again and to look at the report, and once he thought about it again, he realized it would have been a mistake to have resigned on the basis of the independent panel's report, that it would have in fact undermined the legitimacy of the process and the principle of accountability in the Constitution to have done so, and rather he should fight on, and fight on he did. And he came into this conference looking stronger. But of course the conference is a complicated creature, and a lot of people here, there's all sorts of negotiations, discussions, and the mood can swing, and I think it did swing somewhat against him, and he's faced a much more uphill climb than perhaps was to be expected 3 days ago.
Yeah, and that's why, you know, the results coming out of today are really quite something to behold, because we don't know what to expect. I think just to wrap up, and I want to tap into your work as a law professor for a moment and just get your analysis on something. We've had a lot of discussions over the past 3 days about what the leadership trajectory of the party is going to be. Have we had enough discussion around the policy issues? Important constitutional amendments within the party that are going to have a massive impact on what the country does moving forward from a policy point of view.
Well, one is to distinguish two things here, Naledi, and you sort of covered both in your question there. There's the constitutional amendments in terms of the ANC's constitution and its own system of government that needed to be considered. One small example of that was to add a second Deputy Secretary General. That went through fairly easily, so we now speak of a top 7 and not just a top 6. But there are other matters that still need to be debated. Then, of course, there's the wider policy questions for the party as the party that is still in majority in government, and the ideas that it comes up with at this conference are important for the country and for the government. An example of that from last time, 2017, is of course the land question and the idea of expropriation without compensation, which was a kind of last-minute resolution back in 2017, albeit heavily caveated. And that did have an impact on Ramaphosa's presidency early on in its term, when he took power after February 2018, when Zuma was recalled. Will there be something like that this time? I rather doubt it, because I don't think that the focus of this conference is policy. I think policy is very much out of the picture. The predominant attitude amongst the delegates is they're here to vote. They're here to determine leadership, because this is a party that's really consumed by power and patronage and not by issues of policy, ideology or strategy.
Yeah, we're hearing that a lot from a lot of analysts. Prof, a great pleasure speaking to you, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Naledi.
Law Professor Richard Calland speaking to us there. Let's head back to studio. A little bit later on, we're going to be speaking to SABC social media specialist. A lot of fake news on social media. Everybody really guessing who the top 7 is going to be. So we'll speak to Stembiso about what social media is actually saying, what we can trust and what we cannot. Stay with us. Yeah, and you're right, Desiree. And certainly, I mean, a lot of discussion on social media with assumptions of what the results are going to look like. And really, the only way of finding that out is by hearing it from the party itself as it announces its top 7. That's set to happen today. We are, of course, hearing that announcement may be delayed because there may be some disputes with the counting process. We certainly will be working to confirm those allegations as we sit on the ground here and try and gather as much information for you and the country as possible. But let's look at the discussion as it's unfolding on social media. You're correct with the SABC social media specialist Stembiso Chobe here at the SABC. What I've loved about watching social media, though, is seeing not just the debates about what the slates are. I mean, you've got posters out there with possible slates that we don't even necessarily know for sure. I want to talk a little bit about the sort of posters that you've seen promoting each of the presidential candidates.
Yeah.
Posters out there saying Ramaphosa for president.
Yeah, well, Naledi, you are correct. Social media is abuzz with the candidates in terms of who will take this one. Is President Ramaphosa coming back? Is Zweli Mkhize going to be the ANC president? And you correctly said we are really getting underground, getting the news that they are actually possibly they're going to be doing a recount and in between. And that, of course, speaks to us when it comes to fake news. We have to verify the news, double check before we confirm. As you can see, a lot of journalists being urged to really double check and verify. But coming back to the question that you asked me when it comes to the posters,
yes,
it's no secret that social media is playing a critical role when it comes to this national conference of the ANC, and those in support of their preferred candidates are going out there, Naledi, to put the posters. You can see on our screen right now, we have a poster of President Cyril Ramaphosa, who's the current ANC president. You can see that poster with ANC colors really saying he's coming back.
And then you've got the some of the big voices on social media who are saying, well, if he comes back, this is what it looks like, right? Lukhona Mnguni, a very big name on social media, mainstream media as well, but particularly social media. What's he saying?
Definitely, Lukhona Mnguni just going out there on social media has been vocal, of course, talking about what he thinks of President Cyril Ramaphosa, and then also simply saying if he doesn't come back, it's his fault. And then you have another sentiment on social media from Abraham Henekom, who's basically saying, guys, stop it. Stop it. Stop all the noise. The president is coming back. Stop making fake predictions according to him. But the point that he's trying to make in this sentiment is saying the president, without a shadow of a doubt, is coming back. That's what he's saying on social media.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk a little bit more about that. And on the flip side, you've got the posters as well for Dr. Zweli Mkhize.
Yes, and I think for me that is very important, and that's why at the SABC are doing our best to balance that. Make sure that we balance the views of other people. But like you referred on the other one, and then when you look at then Zweli Mkhize, there's another poster that was created on social media saying incoming president of the ANC, and you can then tell the sentiment there is to push the narrative at the same time to actually prepare those. Maybe if he does become the president of the ANC, to say, look out, get ready, he could possibly be the ANC president.
Yeah. I think that's really the big upset, I think, for this national conference is at the beginning of it, it almost seemed that if you read the room, if you will, the proverbial room, there was a sense that this is straightforward a CR conference.
Yes.
Yesterday, those numbers looking very, very different. Now it's quite unsure, and social media is speaking out about that as well.
Definitely, you are correct. At first it seemed like, okay, CR, and then later on, it changed, and then you can tell those are not here at the conference. The delegates, of course, are communicating with the family members, giving them an update blow by blow, and at the same time, we as journalists, ours just to double check in between. But you are correct. When we left last night, there was then that sentiment to say there's a bit of change. Zweli Mkhize could possibly be emerging. Then there's another tweet there, particularly about the presidential hopeful Zweli Mkhize saying he will be the ANC president. That's a sentiment from those on social media. Some other people saying him being the ANC president, he could possibly unite the ANC.
Yeah, Sam Kangile tweeting that President Zweli Mkhize will unite the ANC. That's interesting. Sintlesi also tweeting.
Yeah, Sintlesi very vocal.
Very
we all
vocal.
know him.
Yes.
He's very vocal on social media. That we can't really dispute. This is what he says. He says Zweli Mkhize win would mean a sudden, the perspective that he's giving there is that if he wins Zweli Mkhize, the media would be harsh on him. They will then start, writing articles about him and around corruption and all of that, those allegations. So basically now he's painting a different picture that should he win, then we start seeing a different tone towards the media. We don't know how true that is, but we look forward to double checking and see as the events unfold. And when it comes to that, we all know that he was a former health minister, and of course a lot of developments happened around digital vibes. And well, at this point in time, he's here and he's contesting, and ours is just to monitor in terms of what could be the possibility when if he does emerge or not.
Yesterday while speaking to a few political analysts, we had a discussion around, even just the deputy presidency
Yeah.
and those that are running for deputy president. And one of the analysts saying that the key thing, and this is not the opinion of the SABC,
Definitely.
certainly the opinion of an analyst that
Yeah.
we spoke to, Professor Lesiba Tefo, who says, well, we can talk as much as we want about the deputy president, but Professor Lesiba saying, but that deputy president will never be president of the country. That's the view
Yes.
of Professor Lesiba Tefo, essentially saying that whatever happens here has a big impact on what happens in 2024.
Yes,
when
that's
the
correct.
national elections take place for the country.
That's correct, Naledi, and we must put a disclaimer that these are the views that are shared by our social media users.
Yes.
These are not the views of the SABC, but our task here is to reflect the sentiment on social media. And you are correct. There is life after this national conference. We're heading to 2024. Those will be the national elections. And the sentiment there on social media, echoing the similar sentiment, they're simply saying, whatever happens today, right, whoever emerges. But then those, you can see Sipo simply saying they must do whatever they want to do here in Nasrec, but in 2024, the entire movement must step aside.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it certainly is exciting to see what happens and to watch the discussions on social media. It just reminds you just how colorful and opinionated South Africans really and truly are,
Yeah.
specifically when they have a platform to speak freely. Speaking of speaking freely,
Yeah.
yesterday we talked about how the commander-in-chief
Yes.
of the economic freedom fighters, Julius Malema, has been particularly quiet on social media, really just retweeting some of the things that he's been seeing. You saw a tweet this morning.
Definitely, we saw a tweet actually as we were sitting here,
Yeah,
you and I,
yeah.
discussing our segment, and we just went through on social media. Well, we all know that the EFF leader, Julius Malema, correctly as he's referred to, he's someone who's active on social media. He's someone who has his ears on the ground. He might not be here physically, of course, but I think he's someone who has sources that are well placed. And of course, we're not confirming that what he's saying is true, but he sent a tweet that possibly President Cyril Ramaphosa has survived this, and of course, we're yet to verify that, as you would know.
He says President Ramaphosa will survive.
I put, he said Ankole, that's the name he used.
He said Ankole will survive.
Yeah, as you know, they're using different names, but
Yeah.
we must just put it on record that that's his tweet that he sent, and I think that you correctly said that they're verifying the vote. I mean, there's a view that they should be recount. So we'll look at that, and should he then emerge, then that means then it will definitely, that means he was correct. Should he not emerge, then it will be something else. But as we know, that is someone who's actually active on social media. And just going back again to that 2024, just reflect on that tweet from Aphelele briefly. She says if the absolute best, if the ANC can actually offer President Cyril Ramaphosa and Zweli Mkhize, then she says, then this means, this explains everything, and of course, in that context, you can read it in different ways, but there's a sense of her, because she's consistent in her tweets, Aphelele Somi. Basically, what it means, she has been simply saying, if the ANC currently, they can provide, or can then say it's Cyril or Zweli Mkhize, then there's no hope when it comes to 2024. Those are the views as you look into that timeline.
Well, there you have it. Stembiso Stole, the social media specialist for SABC News. Tell us what you think, what you make of that tweet by the former president of the ANC Youth League, now leader of opposition party Economic Freedom Fighters, tweeting this morning, Ankole will survive. What does that mean to you? Get onto Twitter and share your thoughts and perhaps your predictions of what the leadership race is going to end looking like at the 55th National Conference. Back to you in studio.